views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren, Jaime, and if anybody asks what the show is all about, well, we take a look at social justice. What is social justice? Well, we take a look at some of the inequities that many people in our society face. We present multiple points of view, and then we also encourage civic engagement. We got some great guests, so please stay with us. Social Justice Forums starts now. And welcome back. The Bronx Rising Initiative is an organization dedicated to providing and distributing critical resources across the Bronx in response to the COVID-19 pandemic's disproportionate impact. The organization works to create access to healthcare, alleviate hunger, invest in the growth of small businesses, and inspire youth to better themselves and their borough. To support the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the initiative secured over $3 million in funding for Bronx-based medical organizations. Joining us now to provide their point of view on the matter, I'm joined by the Chief Operating Officer at the Bronx Rising Initiative, Jason Autar. And Jason, good to have you.
Daren, thank you for having us come out here and talk about all the great work that we've been doing so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pivotal time. And when you talk about this pandemic, literally, nobody saw it coming, but yet and still people had to be prepared and make the pivot. For your organization, you really tried to grab the bull by the horns and be able to tackle some real issues.
Yeah, when the pandemic initially started, our founder, executive director, Tomas Ramos, he kind of foresaw that the Bronx was going to be the epicenter of the epicenter. And so what he did was he just galvanized resources from his network there. And so we secured funding from private donors, anonymous donors, who were interested in helping the Bronx. And so what we were able to do was increase ICU bed capacity here in the borough by 33% by partnering with St. Barnabas Hospital, Bronx Lebanon Hospital, providing PPE, but also beyond that, giving critical resources by ensuring that there were beds, that there were ventilators, and that there were resources here for the Bronx once the pandemic and hospitalizations began to increase. Yeah, go ahead.
You know, I was going to say, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about really being the epicenter of the epicenter, the borough of the Bronx. And when we saw these numbers continue to rise across New York City, we saw how the Bronx was seeing more and more people. We talked to Assemblywoman Karina Reyes, and she was also a nurse. And she told us that 95% of the beds were being occupied at one point by COVID patients, and almost 90% of those people are on ventilators. It was really bad.
Yeah, and to that effect, Tomas Ramos, he saw that, coming down the pipeline. When you have a high concentration of individuals in high concentration area of poverty, you're going to get these effects because we don't, unfortunately, have the resources, particularly in the South Bronx, that we need. And so we galvanize those resources to bring them right to the people when they needed it the most.
Yeah. And so, in addition to bed capacity, I know there's a lot of other work that's been doing PPE supplies. People take that for granted, but share with us what has been your experience and may have proper PPE.
Right. So, going back to last year at this time, starting actually in March and April, obviously there weren't a lot of PPE to go around. And so, having to wait for PPE for our essential workers, that was tough. So we found it upon ourselves to go out to actual vendors who were selling this on the market and purchasing those, and then donating it to the most neediest individuals, and that being our frontline staff workers, especially in the hospital settings, because they were the ones not being afforded this PPE just because the federal government did not properly prepare for this pandemic, and so there was a mad dash. And so once we saw that, we understood that this was a stopgap and that we needed to fill the service, and we did it.
Yeah. I want to move now from PPE to where we are today. I mean, let's talk a little bit about where we are today. We're pretty much on the other side, safely we could say, of this pandemic. And as we're on the other side of the pandemic, there's still some work to be done, getting people vaccinated. Bronx Rising Initiative has literally risen their voice and literally their resources towards getting people information and awareness. Share with us a little bit about your awareness campaign and how you're trying to get people aware and vaccinated.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. We started after the PPE distribution and a couple of other initiatives, our donor base, and plus, us as an executive team, we understood that vaccinations were going to be the second part of it. And so as we tackled that, we understood that we needed to meet people where they were. And so what we did was we partnered with Morris Heights Health Center, which is a clinic here in the Bronx. They have multiple locations scattered throughout the borough. And so what we did was through our donor base and just through regular fundraising, we were able to raise a little bit over $2 million to fiscally sponsor the entire operations for vaccinations for Morris Heights. And so as the conversation continued, we understood that there were Bronxites that did not have the resources or the capacity to travel very far. So then that's when we tapped into our network of community partners. And through our community partners, we were able to set up mobile vaccination tours, mostly through NYSATC developments and through other community spaces as well throughout the Bronx. So as we did that, we understood that we had to, again, meet people where they were. And so that's actually knocking on doors and signing people up, registering them so that they can come right downstairs, get vaccinated in their own community spaces, and not have to worry about traveling long distances, not having to worry about, the hardships of where am I going to find, $5 or $6 to get on the bus or the train in order to get to the large mega sites. And while the mega sites are important, it's a multi-pronged approach, right? So while the mega sites are there, we have our mini sites. Our mini sites are able to provide the resources in the community, in community spaces, and have a joint venture with our community partners to also bring up their withstanding in the neighborhood. And so a multi-pronged approach, right? There's a lot of moving parts to that. And so at the forefront of that is our outreach team going and actually knocking on doors, signing people up, and really educating them at the doors as well. Initially, we saw that there was some vaccine hesitancy, but once people saw that their neighbors were getting vaccinated, when they saw the actual staff of Bronx Rising Initiative being vaccinated, that really increased their awareness, but it also increased their ability to say, hey, you know what? If there are folk in my neighborhood that are getting the vaccine and nothing is happening to them, then that really means that there's efficacy involved in here. And there's also the ability for me to also get this vaccine at the most critical juncture. And so that's what we've been able to do from January until now. And that work is going to continue to go because, only 37% of the borough has been fully vaccinated. And out of that, only 29% has at least had one shot. So we know that there's still a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of stopgaps that we need to fill. The outreach team is our bread and butter, actually knocking on doors and making sure that people understand that, we are not out of the woods yet, that there is still some work to be done or a lot of work to be done, and that we really have to double down our efforts and make sure that this word and this information is getting out there. And so we've been seeing a lot of younger folk, particularly from the ages of 18 to 44, who are not being vaccinated for whatever reason. And so that's the population that we are trying to really galvanize toward and really hit across. Because the older population from, let's say, 54 all the way to 85 and up, their efficacy rates and their rates of being vaccinated are much higher than the 18 to 44.
So when you're going door to door, obviously you're meeting people and these conversations are being had. What are you getting? I know you got some people who say, listen, I'm going to get vaccinated, but talk to us about that hesitancy, because it's very real. In communities of color, we know that the hesitancy and the stigmas are still there and they're still prevalent. And then also, we'll share a little bit about Johnson & Johnson, because once the Johnson & Johnson pause came out, from what I heard, there was a pause even in people saying, I don't know if I want to do this right now.
Yeah, definitely. The Johnson & Johnson kind of set us back for a little bit. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. But, definitely in regards to the actual conversations that we are having at folks' door, it takes time, right? And it takes effort to actually stand there for, 5, 10, 15 minutes and have these conversations. But these are much needed conversations. And, a lot of our outreach workers, they are from our communities, so they look like us and they do represent us. And so their ability to relay this information is really critical. And so, using anecdotes is important because, and getting a lot of this message through word of mouth is important. And so once neighbors see us spending the time and actually educating folk and letting them know that there's a high efficacy rate involved in these vaccines, it really gets to them. And it really makes them understand the importance of this. Obviously, folk are free to choose what they do. And so a lot of what we've been hearing is, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait because we don't know the long-term side effects. We don't know enough about the vaccine, and we just don't know. And so you have to respect a person's right to choose and their option to choose what goes into their body. But I think with us and our increased visibility and our ability to really double back and our ability to just be patient and work with folk and really answer those hard to need questions. And we tell them, listen, we're not medical professionals, but we've been working in this space for quite some time. So we do understand and we do come across these questions often. So that has really prepared us. I think in the beginning, we, our outreach team, myself included, we weren't apt to really answering a lot of those technical questions, but working with Morris Heights, hearing a lot about what they have to say and their informationals to us has really, really prepared us for where we are in this juncture. Just to touch back to the Johnson & Johnson, it did set us back, at some of our clinics, or pop-up clinics rather, we were having really great numbers, 150, 200. And then right after, we actually had one particular clinic, we were slated to have X amount of folk, and we only had 70 show up that particular day. But these things happen, right? It's science. Science is not 100% accurate all the time. It can offer us alternatives and it can offer us solutions, but definitely knowing and understanding that these things do happen, and then relaying that to our communities as well. And I think, again, taking the time out and really, presenting these ideas to people, I think for the most part, they get it. Like I said, a lot of the older population, they definitely understand it. And, just the other day, knocking on someone's door, someone actually said, I want a Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which was good to hear because it shows that in spite of everything else, that they still want to get vaccinated, right? And that's the most important thing. I think the president said it best. It doesn't matter what vaccine you have in front of you. That is the one that you ought to take or should take because of the resource that's been given. And so with that, that is also the approach that we are telling folk. However, folk have the right and the option to choose. And so primarily we've been working with the Moderna for our pop-up clinics. So that has helped. I know you touched on and we'll touch on it later, our homebound program and how that kind of affected us with the Johnson & Johnson.
Yeah, I'm coming into that right now because when you talk about seniors, you talk about the fact that they're homebound. A lot of seniors were saying, listen, I want to get the Johnson & Johnson because I get that one shot and I'll be able to be done. But we know that when Johnson & Johnson had their pause, there was a great pause. So give me a little bit about being able to reach that senior population and what we're hearing from them, particularly when that Johnson & Johnson pause came out.
Yeah, even in spite of that, our seniors still wanted to get vaccinated, right? Especially for the homebound program. Just a little bit about the homebound program. We've partnered with VIP Community Services, which is another clinic here in the Bronx that's been just a stalwart, just been doing great work over the last 30 plus years. And so we've partnered with them in order to do the homebound program. The homebound program was put on pause because the Johnson & Johnson was slated for the homebound program. And so when the pause was initially occurred, we had to logistically figure out how were we going to administer these shots. So we had to put a pause on even our programming. And so that affected us and it set us back a few weeks as well. Eventually we got word that we can use the Moderna. And so we've restarted as of this week, vaccinating folk. And, overwhelming majority, as we're, making our phone calls, making our appointments, folk have been asking for the Moderna. So they're with the Johnson & Johnson. And so we've had to go back and now do, this logistically in terms of the Moderna, doing the homebound program. It's a little bit more cumbersome, but at the same point in time, shots in the arm, jabs in the arm, that's what's most important in inoculating the most vulnerable population, seniors who are homebound. And so
Yeah.
that's what we're going to continue to do, because that's the most important thing, regardless if they don't want Johnson & Johnson.
Are there any, I'm sorry to cut you, are there any particular things that we're hearing from seniors that you might be able to relate to us as you go from door to door?
Again, they've, what we've heard from them is, we've survived this long, we'd rather wait with something, that being the Moderna, and in taking our chance with that rather than having the Johnson & Johnson and not know what's wrong with us. And, we'll relay the information to them and the statistics just in terms of how effective the Johnson & Johnson is. But again, you have to respect people's opinions, and you have to respect what they want to put into their bodies and their choices. So we're respectful of that. And, vaccines, it seems, things are opening up a lot more, and there are different access points. And so with more information, folk have that choice, and they should be obligated to their choices.
Yeah. Creating opportunities is something that the Bronx Rising Initiative continues to do. Talk to us a little bit about the Brandon Hendricks Scholarship.
Yeah, so, Brandon Hendricks was just a magnificent young man. He was actually a participant at the Bronx River Community Center when Tomas Ramos, our AD and founder of Bronx Rising Initiative, was the director there. And so he knew Brandon Hendricks pretty well. And so last year, Brandon Hendricks, unfortunately, was gunned down by just a senseless, gun crime. And, he had a full pledged scholarship to go play at St. John's University. He was a gifted basketball player. He was well known in the community, well loved. And so in honor of his life and his legacy and just who he was, we have from there on started the Brandon Hendricks Scholarship Foundation. And that started last year where we awarded 5 young people, awards of $5,000 who are, went into college for the first time last year, who were freshmen, obviously. And so we're going to continue to uphold Brandon's name and legacy. And so this year, we're also doing the same thing. This year, we are expanding it to 10 winners for $5,000 apiece. So as you can see, the fundraising and just who Brandon was, it continues to live because we've been able to expand now from 5 last year to now 10 winners this year.
So for people who want to find out more about what you guys are doing and how they can actually take part, how can the public play a part in the great work that you're doing?
Yeah, so you can find us on, on our website, www.bronxrisinginitiative.org. You can also follow us on social media. We have links on our page to our social media. And you can actually sign up for the Homebound program on our page. We have a Survey Monkey there, and you can also apply for our Brandon Hendricks scholarship as well there. Applications were open on May 3rd. We're going to choose a winner on July 7th at a community event. So all young people across the borough, please feel free to, put your name in there. It has all of the information of what we're looking for in the Scholarship Foundation. And so just a little bit more about, the scholarship. It's multiple people that are involved in it. So it's our organization, obviously, but Brandon's parents and family are involved, as well as his former coaches. So we're making it an entire community event on July 7th, not just to celebrate him, but also to celebrate the young people who are taking part in this initiative and really, furthering the borough and really the pride of our borough is our young people. So we want to make that a staple moving forward. And we also want young people to understand that here is a resource, it's a Bronx resource that you can tap into as long as you live in the borough.
All right. Jason, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much for coming and being with us here on the Social Justice Forums, where we had an opportunity to talk about a variety of different things. Thanks so much, buddy.
Thank you so much, Daren. Really appreciate you, and I look forward to coming back again soon.
Absolutely. All righty. Once you listen, stay with us. We're going to take a quick break. Got more on the Social Justice Forums. We'll return coming up right after this.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
To the show. The New York State Anti-Trafficking Coalition is a group of organizations joining forces to increase public awareness of human trafficking in our communities, enact anti-trafficking laws, and improve law enforcement response and increase social services to help people escape trafficking. The Empower Center provides a variety of free healthcare and social services to support people in the sex trade, as well as people who've experienced any form of sexual violence. Now, Empower is one of the only clinics in the United States dedicated to providing trauma-sensitive long-term medical care for people with a history of sexual trauma and abuse. Joining me now to share more details on this matter, I'm joined by the Vice Chair of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Jacobi Medical Center and a member of the NYSATC and co-director of the Empower Center, Dr. Veronica Ades, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
When we talk about these things, they're very serious in nature and also very traumatic. And I want to talk a little bit about trafficking and how prevalent it is in our community. But some way, Dr. Ades, a lot of people still don't know.
Yeah. I think it's actually really important for people to understand exactly what trafficking is. It is essentially being exploited, and it can be for the purpose of labor or sex. And so I focus more on those who have been trafficked for sex, but examples of labor can be physical labor, farm work, or domestic servitude. In the case of sex trafficking, that can include what we traditionally refer to as prostitution, but it can also include things like pornography and other forms of sexual exploitation. And it doesn't require the crossing of borders, unlike, for example, drug trafficking. So many people think that you have to have moved from one country to another or one state to another. That's not true. You could be born in the Bronx, raised in the Bronx, and trafficked in the Bronx, and never have left but still be trafficked.
Pretty prevalent in our society, and as it's prevalent in our society, a lot of people are victims of it. Talk to me from a victim's perspective about what you uncover once you're dealing with the victim.
So we see a lot of different pathways of trafficking. Some people are romantically coerced into it. They might meet somebody and he, romances them and they're in love. We see that pattern a lot coming from Mexico and Central America, but also here in the Bronx. Another pathway is, let's say, foster youth. Foster youth are very vulnerable to trafficking because they already have a lot of vulnerabilities and instability. And so from the victim's perspective, a lot of times they are coerced into it and they're convinced by the trafficker that they agreed to this. And that's a very powerful form of coercion because they are really convinced, it's almost a Stockholm syndrome or what we call trauma bonding, that this is what they want. And it's often not until later that they realize how abusive the situation was. And that actually making choices in that situation is very difficult to do when your alternative is it's for survival. So it's either die or engage in this activity. And then the person who is encouraging you to go into it or really kind of controlling a lot of the aspects of it is taking your money, sometimes offering you protection. And without that, you would be really alone. But when we speak with victims or survivors, people who have left, it's really important that we honor their self-identification and their recovery process. So we also work with people who are still engaged in commercial sex. And it's not something where we try to convince people that they should live their life one way or another. But we're aware that people in the commercial sex industry are often very vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. And we want to be there for them no matter what.
What's the perception like on their side? Because honestly, you said there's a lot of people who will not lend a or stereotype. But from your perspective, you're dealing with somebody who's a human being, who's got some major challenges, but you're not trying to convert, as you said, but you're just really trying to be present.
One of the things I've heard from survivors is that they experience a lot of discrimination in the system. Before they ever get to healthcare, that could be the foster system, that could be ACS, that could be incarceration, that could be racism, that could be misogyny and sexism. But then they get to healthcare, and sometimes they're seen as prostitutes, sometimes they're seen as drug addicts or substance addicts, or in other ways not deserving of respect. And from my perspective, all of those people are deserving of respect. All people are deserving of respect. But that they feel that they have been mistreated in the system. And so then they walk in feeling like, I'm going to mistreat them too. And so the reason we started Empower was to address some of those problems, to say, hey, we get it, we understand, we've seen this before, and you are absolutely deserving of worth and respect. I think another thing is trust. Many people have experienced sexual abuse as a child, other forms of family violence, and have been abused by the people who are in authority or supposed to protect them, so that they have a hard time walking into the doctor's office, where you're often losing, you're giving up control because that doctor knows more than you do about medicine. So that can be really disempowering. So we want to re-empower and create a sense of empowerment when they come to the doctor. That includes offering comprehensive services. One of our most important staff members is our peer care navigator. She herself survived trafficking, and she's able to say to our clients, hey, I've been there. And listen, this is how we do our services. I'll take you to the doctor's office if you need. I'll accompany you wherever you need. Because that disempowerment is really strong, and it makes it hard to take the first step to come in for medical care.
When we talk about that one word, trust, you have to build it, right? And that's very important for somebody coming across the doors to be able to have that trust. Absolutely. A lot of times on the outside, that's not going to happen. But you on the inside have to build those walls of trust. How long is that process in terms of building trust with victims who've been of sexual violence and also sex trafficking? Because you're talking about something that's pretty intimate.
Yeah. Trust building takes a long time, and it takes a lot of work, and it's a process. It's not just a one-time thing. One of the things that we do is when people are referred to us, people can self-refer on our website, theempowercenter.org, or they can be referred by a social service organization. And we do an intake with a case manager, and that case manager assesses their needs. First of all, we build trust by addressing their primary identified needs. So even if we say, hey, this person needs to see a doctor, but she's saying that her primary need is legal, let's get the legal taken care of, because that's what she wants right now. But the second thing that we do is that we have the person most relevant reach out and build that trust. Like I said, the peer care navigator, but also the case manager can do that. Our social service staff will potentially communicate with clients through text messaging or phone or video chat, whatever they're most comfortable with, until they're ready to take the next step and come in. And that's actually something that the COVID telecommunications friendly world has helped us with, because while we were built as a walk-in center, allowing for initial contact to be by text message sometimes is just more approachable.
So I want to talk about sex trafficking, sexual violence. When you hear people who are engaged in sex trafficking, from the victim's perspectives, there's also that stereotype. That stereotype is, okay, at any point they can walk away, they can leave, they can not be a part of this, right? But it's not so easy. Share with us a little bit from a layperson's perspective, so that way we might be able to know, what are those barriers? Because it seems so simple. We hear that with domestic violence. Why don't the person just leave? Well, same thing happens in sex trafficking, sex violence. It's not that simple.
That's a great question. So one myth about sex trafficking is that it's somebody trapped in a room, imprisoned in a room. That's actually rarely the case. Most of the time, there's this coercive trauma bonding that I mentioned. And that's actually a more strong prison than keeping somebody locked up, because when you're in a prison of the mind, it keeps you very strongly. Some of the victims that I've spoken to said that they were put on a bus by their trafficker to go to Philadelphia to service a group of men there and come back, right? And it's easy to think, why wouldn't you run away? But the reality is many people have so many challenges. So they may have immigration barriers, they may be undocumented, they may not speak English, they may have a long history of trauma and abuse. If they were raised in with family violence or the foster care system, they may not trust any authorities, and they may have experience in the carceral system. They may have been arrested for prostitution or other crimes that their trafficker got them into, and so may not trust law enforcement. Another barrier is how they've been seen in the past in the system as well. There is also a myth of this strict separation between prostitution, voluntary prostitution, and trafficking. But the reality is much more complicated. And like I said, the coercion factor is very powerful. Anybody who has a pimp is being exploited. And so to say that, oh, this person is choosing it, like I said, it's complicated, and we respect everybody's self-identification, but we also have to leave the door open when somebody is ready to leave and maybe has fears of violence. So when they're thinking about trying to leave trafficking or leave the commercial sex industry and go into something else, they think, do I have any self-worth? Can I do something else? What can I do? They might have arrests on their record and may not be able to get another job. Maybe they didn't finish high school. Maybe they don't speak English. So it's really, really overwhelming to think about just doing something else, which is why Empower has an amazing economic empowerment specialist that can help people take the next step and get a GED or go to a job fair or write their resume so that they can maybe go and do something else.
Yeah, I want to take the time out and allow you to share a little bit about the services that you do have, because there may be somebody that's out there watching, somebody who has a family member, or maybe them themselves who needs some assistance in this area. Talk about the services you provide.
Yeah, thank you. So we have both medical and social services. Our medical services include myself as an OBGYN. We have a primary care provider. We have psychiatry available, and we also have therapy available. And then on the social service side, we have case managers. We have a peer care navigator who, as I mentioned, is a survivor of trafficking herself and is an amazing and wonderful resource to our clients. We have full-time legal services and an economic empowerment specialist. If people need other kinds of services like housing, dental, ophthalmology, anything like that, we have ways of connecting them to their services, either through the facilities that we work in, which are Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx and Gouverneur Health in Manhattan, or through other organizations. But our case managers really help walk them through it so that we can get them the services that they need.
Yeah. So for people who want to get connected, how do they go about doing that?
So the best way is to go to our website, theempowercenter.org. Make sure the is at the beginning there, theempowercenter.org. And then we have a link to a referral form there. They can also read more about our services, but there's a link to a referral form that they can fill out, and then one of our intake coordinators will contact them. And as I mentioned, people can self-refer, or somebody can refer them, and then we will contact whoever it is made the referral. So if the person themselves referred, we'll contact them. If there's a therapist or a case manager who made the referral, we'll contact that person first. It's helpful for us to know if the phone number being left is safe to contact that person on, because we realize that survivors of trafficking are often in abusive situations. So having that information is helpful.
Yeah, it's a tremendous level of abuse that sometimes we are not so sensitive to, but we understand those who are engaged in sex trafficking and sexual violence have had a lot to deal with and to contend with. I know that the word empower, it's an acronym actually. So I forgot to mention that at the beginning of the show, but I want to give you a chance to explain a little bit about what the word empower and that acronym actually means.
Yeah, so it came out of my work with survivors and thinking about, what are the kinds of things that I want to bring to this medical care? So it's engage, motivate, protect, organize, and then self-worth, the W, educate, and respect. So those are the principles behind Empower.
So as we get ready to close, what would you like people to know?
So I'd like people to know that in the Bronx, there are many, many trafficking victims and survivors out there who are going unidentified and who may themselves not actually realize that they are victims or survivors, that they are deserving of our empathy and respect, and many have experienced a lot of traumas. So we as healthcare providers need to be sensitive to traumas, but people out in the community may also recognize, say, hey, this is my friend or my cousin or my sister. She's being victimized, and this is a way to help her. And sometimes healthcare is the first step that people will take to help themselves, and then we can offer them additional services.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming and being with us here on the show and certainly providing us some much needed information. I think that when we talk about the issue of sexual assault and sex trafficking, I think you put it in better context. Many times I think when we talk about sex trafficking, it's taking somebody from one state to the other. But as you said, this could occur right within the city confines.
And it's happening way too much.
Any estimation on the number of people who are being victimized locally?
It's really hard to know, honestly, because the practice is so under wraps. It's hard for me to even give a number. We have probably statistics from worldwide or from nationally, but it would be really hard for me to say in the Bronx how many people. And frankly, I'm shocked by how many people come through our health services and then have previously been unidentified. So I don't think we know yet, but one of the things I'm trying to do is do more research so we can have a better understanding of how much is going on.
And before we go, I know it's not your forte, but also enforcement, right? Really trying to deal and crack down on this. Are you satisfied with what you're seeing by way of people really taking the bull by the horns and addressing the matter?
Yeah, I mean, I would really like to see avenues for relief offered to victims outside of the incarceration system. I think it's really traumatizing to be arrested. And in the United States, we tend to design our entire systems around the criminal justice system, which is unfortunate. So Empower is really trying to say, this is outside the criminal justice system. And we want you to come to us no matter where you are in this stage of life, but we offer services to you. So that's really kind of fundamentally where I'm at with that.
Dr. Veronica Ades, thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums.
Thank you for having me.
All righty. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We are taking a quick break. We'll return with more show. Stay with us coming up in a few. to the show. My next guest is an educator, an entrepreneur, an author, and a former law enforcement detective. He utilizes his street experience growing up in a tough New York City neighborhood, combined with his law enforcement career, to empower, educate, and change the minds of youth. Through his strategic empowerment speeches, his workshops, and his books, he's helping not only change the youth, but anyone who is stuck into having a positive and productive mindset. Joining me now and sharing more, I am joined by the retired NYPD homicide detective, author, and empowerment speaker, Dr. Alfred S. Titus Jr. Dr. Titus, good to have you with us.
Hello, Daren. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on this great platform.
Well, thank you. We say it's a great platform because we have an opportunity to actually have some dialogue, and really because when we talk about some of the matters that are germane to you, they're front and center right now. And so I want to just get a little bit about you, first of all, for people who don't know you, a little bit about your work. As I said before, you are a former NYPD homicide detective. How do you go from homicide detective to turning around and saying, I want to be an author now?
Yeah. Well, Daren, there are a lot of things that I dealt with and that I saw on the streets working in NYPD, and it allowed me to want to give back even more than I could as a law enforcement officer. You know, I joined NYPD to help people, to help the community, to be the positive role model for my children and other minorities and African American men. When I got into the job, you know, I did well. I progressed up the ladder, you know, as I should have, and you know, I made it to the highest level of being a detective, which is first grade. And but what always bothered me was that when we went out on calls, it would always be in a minority neighborhood, and it would always be our children that were involved with a lot of these things. And I was the type of detective that when I got a young person in a room for an interview or an interrogation, I would always shift it and ask them, what are they doing here? Why aren't they going to school? You know, what changed their lives? And I always try to empower them and make them realize that they have the power to make changes in their life, to get out of the street life and live a more productive, successful life. So with that, I decided to retire. I had a son that was in his teenage years. He was going a little bit astray. So I connected that with what I was seeing out in the streets, and I wrote my first book, which is Forward Motion, The Keys to Progress and Success. That book was geared toward my son. It's a motivational empowerment book, and it's great for the youth because it teaches them to use the skills that they have, not be limited by any circumstances within their life, and to progress and be empowered, overall change their mindset. Right. And I decided with that book to start an organization. And my organization is Forward Motion Life Success. And with that, I go around the city and I do empowerment speaking. I have a workshop that empowers the youth. You know, my goal is still to help the youth.
Yeah, I want to talk about your message and the receptivity to it. Obviously, you do get great receptivity. People are listening to the message. But when you come in and you say, listen, you know what? This guy's a former homicide detective, works the NYPD.
Yes.
In a culture that is not really pro-blue right now.
Yes.
What's it been like? What's it been like for you chopping it up with these people?
Well, there are times when I'm welcome. You know, everybody's like, okay, this guy must have some positive information. Then there are other times you get that same mentality that I was getting when I was in law enforcement. No one wants to talk to the police. No one wants to listen to the police. The police are the enemy. So, you know, I have to kind of break that down. And I go back to a story that happened to me that kind of led me to retirement. And there was this kid that I had met through several interviews. And we kind of got a little close, and I kept, you know, talking to him, trying to get him to get out of the gang and change his life around. So he finally said to me, I'm going to look into getting my GED and then making other moves. I said, good. The next homicide I went to, I pulled back the sheets and it was that same kid. And I realized then that if I could have reached him, or if he was more receptive to the information I was giving him, it could have been another life saved. And that drives me, and I have many stories like that I can relate to the youth to get them to understand that, listen, you're going in the wrong direction, or you're not moving at all, because we have a lot of youth that are not necessarily going in the wrong direction, but because of everything that's going on in the world today, they are stuck. They don't know which way to go. You know, I have even college students that I teach that are telling me, Professor, we don't know what to do. We don't know to go, you know, it's a law enforcement school I teach at, John Jay College in Manhattan. And a lot of the students that came in to be law enforcement officers are backing away from that now. And I'm telling them, just like I tell the youth, we need you. Now is the time where we need new, young, fresh blood, fresh ideas to get out there and make the changes that we need. And the same thing with our youth. They have so much potential. And I speak to some of these kids and they are so smart and educated, just within themselves. If they could just follow the steps of a program that I've set up, the 7 steps, it'll take them right into the success that they need.
I was getting ready to ask that question. Talk to me about these steps, because you do have 7 steps to that outline.
Yes.
So what are those steps if somebody's watching?
Okay, well, the first step is to recognize that change is needed, okay? You have to recognize that my life is not going in the right direction. This is not how I'm supposed to be proceeding, and this is not going to lead me to where I want to go. So you have to realize that you have to change. Then you have to learn that there are about 4 key words that you need to learn and understand: motivation, ambition, determination. You need to learn what those mean and apply those to your life. You also need to be able to realize that a lot of the limits, a lot of the things that are stopping you, we have a lot of young people who have issues within their families, maybe issues, maybe they grew up in a single mother household, or their father or their mother is incarcerated, or someone is on drugs, or you can't let those things limit you. You have to succeed despite of everything else that's going on in your life. You have the power within yourself to still succeed, to push past that. And the number one thing is developing a game plan. You have to have a game plan, which means you have to put it on paper. It has to be something you look at every day. It has to be a plan with steps that you follow. And I go through all of that with them, because my goal is to empower, not just motivate. Motivate means to just tell someone to do something. Empower shows them how to do it. It's very similar to that old adage, teach a man to fish and you feed him for life. You know the one I'm referring to.
Yeah.
That one is very important, that our youth learn these key concepts, because they can be applied throughout their entire life.
Yeah. I know in addition to all of these things, you also take your police background and you bring that to the forefront too. So you have an opportunity to talk to them about the things that go on. And let's look at what's going on in the nation right now. A lot of people are being unfairly targeted. Our men are being shot, traffic stops. And so talk to us about that conversation that you're having, because you are going behind the badge and giving us some up front and center stuff.
Absolutely, Daren. I've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of interactions with police go wrong. We've all seen them now in the media. So I have another program that's called Positive Interactions with Law Enforcement. And with that program, I go out into communities and I discuss how to interact safely with the police, what your rights are, what you should be doing, what you should not be doing. But more importantly, I give them the mindset of the police. I give them an insight into how the police are thinking and why they're doing what they're doing. And with that understanding comes greater knowledge. It's important that we understand each other's side. So I give that understanding to the community so that they can understand why the police officer is asking me to do this, why the police officer is demanding that I do this or requesting or whatever the case may be. But most importantly, I tell them that the important thing is to get home safely. That means that if there is something that if the police officer is disrespectful, if the police officer is doing something that you think is illegal, that right there on the street may not be the best time to handle that situation. Get home safely, make sure you take his badge, your number, and all that stuff without making a big scene, and get that information, and you can live to fight the issue another day, because more than likely it's just a summons or a traffic stop or something like that, and it doesn't really have to get to the point where there's a physical confrontation. So I break that down into what they can do, what they cannot do, what a police officer can do, why he's stopping you, everything. I just provide clear understanding so that our youth can react properly and get home safely.
You talk about a mere incident, and you talk about a small incident that went too far, George Floyd, and we know that the death of George Floyd was preventable. And when people watch the death of George Floyd and now the conviction of former police officer Derek Chauvin, a lot of conversation is had. Talk to me about what it's been like for you, who's worn both sides, right?
Yes.
But now on the other side of this, you're going out and you're talking to people, you're dealing with people. What do you feel needs to happen right now after the Derek Chauvin verdict?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I have a webinar regarding that. It's called Conversations with Dr. Al After the Verdict, Where Do We Go From Here? And that is geared towards parents and educators and the youth, and it's focused on empowering our youth to make the next move. But from the law enforcement aspect, the first thing, I've had many conversations about this. I'm sure you can imagine. So the first thing is that we need to get rid of police officers like Derek Chauvin. That's number one. We need to keep the pressure on law enforcement, keep the pressure on government, and that means protest peacefully, whatever it is that is happening. Because believe it or not, and a lot of people may not realize it, there's a lot of change happening, Daren. A lot of change is happening, especially here in New York. The qualified immunity thing, the laws is being changed, the chokeholds, everything is being looked at. Now is a great time to get into policing. And that's what we need. We need more minorities, African-American men, Hispanic men to get into law enforcement, and then not just get into law enforcement, but try to reach the levels where you are part of the decision-making process. We now have a few people in key positions throughout the department, and it's changing quickly. We have women progressing, we have African-American progressing. We need more of that, because when we are making the decisions on how we police ourselves, it will be done completely different. We have too many capable African-American males that are shying away from law enforcement. And to be honest with you, you can't really blame them when they don't know the insight, but the benefits of the job, in addition to what you could possibly be a part of, it's no longer going to be the old law enforcement that everybody knows. Law enforcement is under a huge transformation right now. So now's the time to get, excuse me?
I didn't mean to cut you off. No, good. Okay. But I was going to ask the question. We talk about changing. I wanted to ask about diversity in the NYPD. Talk to me about the diversity. Are you satisfied with what you're seeing as far as the diversity in that makeup?
Yes. Well, to be honest with you, and most people would not realize this, there are more minorities in NYPD than there are Caucasians, believe it or not. However, when it comes to the decision-making ranks, when it comes to the lieutenants and the captains and the chiefs and the inspectors, that's where we are absent. That's what we need. We need more of us in a decision-making position. I am not happy with the makeup of NYPD. I need to be more diversity in the upper ranks. and just more people taking the test. It's a career. It's not a job. It's a career where you have a pension, you have health insurance for life, you get a pension for life. These are things that can be the beginning of creating generational wealth. But we have to make key moves, and a lot of us are shying away from that. And it's now time for us to embrace it and get involved on the inside. That's where change can be made the easiest.
Yeah, I think that, you know, when you look at a career, people don't look at it as a path to a career. They just look at it as cops.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I think you miss a lot of that because some of the conversations I've had with people about why not become a police officer, they're viewed as cops.
Yes.
And because they're viewed as cops, I don't want to be a part of that.
Right.
But when we really think about it, the career and also the opportunity to have influence and impact within their very own community. I've often said change doesn't start on the outside, it can start from within.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what a lot of our young people need to take heed of and, you know, be part of the solution, you know?
Being a part of the solution is definitely a part of it. You're a part of the solution now. And the conversation is being had. We talk about from a police perspective. We talk about from a young person's perspective. But as we draw down to a close, talk to me a little bit about where you see things happening going forward. The summer's upon us, busy time, and particularly for our young people.
Yeah.
Now that we're getting a little bit more time out there, what's the message?
The message is to stay safe. Go to my website, look me up, reach out to me. I want to be part of the change. There are tremendous opportunities since George Floyd. You open your credit card statement and you see, we support Black Lives Matter. Everybody's on board now. There are, well, not everyone, obviously, but there are opportunities that we need to now take heed of. Doors are opening. It is time for us to grab these opportunities and change the image that the world has of us and change our growth as a people. So with the summer coming, COVID ending, restrictions ending, there's going to be a lot of people on the streets again. And, you know, we need to prepare ourselves for the next step, the next level for our people.
So, well, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Titus. I think it's been great to have this conversation. I want to bring you back, certainly, that we might be able to share in the conversation and be able to let people know exactly how to balance this out. I think there's a balancing act that needs to happen. You know both sides, so hopefully you can bring some more balance to our community. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All righty, as you said, Dr. Titus has that webinar. Make sure you check it out. And of course, find out more information. Listen, we're done here with the show. We're out of time. Yeah, we've had a great conversation with all of our guests. Want to tell you, make sure tune in next week. We're going to elevate the conversation, continue the dialogue, and bring you some much needed information so that way you can be informed in a time like this. It's about the social justice forums, where it's about social justice, it's about conversation, information, and passing it on to you. I'm Daren Jaime saying take care, and we'll talk to you soon.